The kitchen at Nero's doesn't have windows. That's the first thing you notice when you start working the back shift. The fluorescent lights never dim, never change. And neither does the smell of garlic and burnt oil that clings to your skin like a second layer. I've been working at Nero's for 3 months. Before that, it was a deli 2 blocks over. Before that, a coffee shop where the espresso machine broke twice a week, and the owner's hands shook when he thought no one was looking. I'm not running from anything specific. I'm just moving. It's what I do. My name is Iris. I tell people that's short for Irisiana, which it isn't. My actual name is something my mother gave me when she was still alive, and I haven't used it since I was 17. Iris feels safer, anonymous, a flower that blooms and dies without anyone really paying attention. That night, the night everything fractured, I was clearing the private dining room on the 2nd floor. It was late, past midnight, and the restaurant was supposed to be closed. But Marco, the owner, always kept one room open for special guests. That's what he called them. I never asked questions. Questions at Nero's get you fired, and I like this job. The pay is decent, the hours are flexible, and Marco doesn't care if you're invisible. I'm good at being invisible. The room smelled like expensive cigars and the particular kind of cologne that costs more than my monthly rent. 3 men were seated at the table, and I'd learned to recognize the signs of the people who came here. They dressed in sharp blacks and grays. They spoke in low voices, and they always sat with their backs to the walls. I'd seen this particular man before, the one at the head of the table. He was impossible not to notice, which was strange because he was the kind of handsome that should have been obvious. Sharp cheekbones, dark hair, eyes that looked gray in certain light. But it was more than that. It was the way the space around him seemed to compress, like the air itself was smaller, denser, more important when he occupied it. He wore a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and I'd caught myself staring at the lines of his forearms more than once while I was supposed to be clearing wine glasses. I'm not supposed to think about customers that way. I'm especially not supposed to think about customers like that. I knocked twice before pushing the door open with my tray balanced on my hip. The knocking was a courtesy I extended to all the private dining guests. A small ritual that meant I was about to exist in their space, and they had a moment to prepare for it. "Just the dessert plates," I said, keeping my eyes on the table. "Let me clear these for you." The man at the head didn't acknowledge me. The older man to his left nodded slightly. The third man, who had scar tissue along his jaw, and the kind of stillness that made your nervous system understand he was dangerous without any conscious decision on your part, watched me with the intensity of someone studying a chessboard. I moved around the table quickly, gathering the remains of their meal. Expensive fish, barely touched, wine glasses that had been emptied and refilled, a cigar stubbed out in a crystal ashtray. I was almost done when the older man leaned forward, and the dangerous one laughed a sound like dry gravel. "You trust her?" the scar man asked. She's a waitress," the older man interrupted. His accent was thick, Russian or Ukrainian, something Eastern European that made his English sound like he was speaking it underwater. "She clears tables, nothing more." "Reckless," the scar man said. But the man at the head of the table, the one I'd been trying not to look at, still hadn't said anything. He was smoking, and his exhale curled into the air with a kind of lazy deliberation. "It doesn't matter," he said finally. His voice was low, and when I heard it, something in my chest recognized it as dangerous in a completely different way than the scarred man. Not because of what he might do, but because of what he might make me feel. "We'll be dead by Thursday anyway." I froze. The plate I was holding was halfway to the tray, and I froze mid-movement, like my body had suddenly received instructions to turn into marble. Every nerve ending I possessed was suddenly, vividly aware of 3 things: the cool ceramic of the plate against my palm, the sound of my own breath, and the fact that the man with the gray eyes was now looking directly at me. Not at the table. At me. "Renko," the older man said sharply, and it took me a moment to understand that was the dangerous man's name. "Don't do that." But the scar man, Renko, was already shaking his head. "She heard." "No, she didn't," the man at the head of the table said. His eyes didn't leave mine. "She's pretending she didn't. She's very good at pretending." I don't know how I moved, but suddenly I was setting the plate down on my tray, and my hands were completely steady. I'd never been good at lying with my face. My mother always said I broadcast my emotions like a neon sign, but I was good at lying with my body. I could make my hands move normally. I could keep my breathing level. "Would you like dessert?" I asked the man with the gray eyes. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else, someone brave, someone who didn't understand what she'd just overheard. "No," he said. "I'll have the panna cotta," the older man said, clearly trying to move past the moment. I nodded, still avoiding those gray eyes, and turned toward the door. My legs felt like they were moving through water, but I made it to the exit without visibly shaking. I didn't make it down the hallway. The man was faster than anyone that size should be. I heard the door open behind me, heard his footsteps, and then he was there, not touching me, but close enough that I could feel the heat of his body and smell that expensive cologne mixed with something darker, something like smoke and expensive leather. "What's your name?" he asked. "Iris." I didn't know whether he already knew or not. At Nero's, I'd filled out paperwork. There were records. People like him, people who sat in private rooms discussing being dead by Thursday, probably had access to more information than that. "Iris," he repeated, and somehow hearing my name in his voice made it feel like something private, something stolen. "You didn't hear that conversation." I turned to look at him, and it was a mistake. Up close, he was even more dangerous. His eyes were exactly what I'd thought, gray like winter, like stone, like something that had never been warm, but there was something else too. Something underneath the danger that looked almost like exhaustion. "I didn't hear anything," I said. "You're lying." "Yes." That might have been the first honest thing I'd said to him. The corner of his mouth moved, just slightly, like he was considering a smile but had decided against it. "What did you hear?" he asked. "That you'll be dead by Thursday." The words hung in the hallway between us, and I watched his expression shift something like respect, or maybe just surprise that I'd said it out loud. "You should leave Nero's," he said. "Tonight. Don't come back." "Why?" "Because you heard that conversation." And now, he paused, and his hand came up like he was about to touch my face. But he stopped just short, leaving an inch of charged air between his fingers and my skin. "Now you're a problem." Then he turned and walked back into the private dining room, leaving me standing alone in the hallway with the taste of fear coating the back of my throat and something far more dangerous blooming in my chest. I didn't leave Nero's that night. I went back to the kitchen and finished my shift with the kind of mechanical precision that comes from running on pure adrenaline. I took the long way home, walking through rain-heavy streets and checking over my shoulder too many times to count. When I got to my apartment, a studio in a building that smelled like other people's cooking and desperation, I locked the door, pulled the blinds, and sat on my bed in the dark. Being dead by Thursday was only 4 days away, and I had just looked into the gray eyes of someone who seemed to know it. I quit Nero's the next morning. I didn't call. I didn't send a text. I just didn't show up for the dinner shift. Marco would assume I'd found another job, or that I'd done what all the transient people at Nero's eventually did, simply vanished into whatever city corner had temporarily become my life. But I didn't get another job. Instead, I spent the day in my apartment, pacing, making coffee I didn't drink, and trying to convince myself that what happened was a one-time thing, a situation I'd stumbled into by accident, extracted myself from by leaving, and could now forget about like every other piece of my life I'd deliberately shed. Except I couldn't forget about it, because on Thursday morning, the news said Dmitry Volkov, a businessman with ties to Russian organized crime, had been killed in his penthouse at the Meridian Hotel. He'd been shot 3 times in the chest, execution style, and the killer had walked out through the front entrance like it was any other day. The man at the head of the table had said they'd be dead by Thursday. He'd meant Dmitry Volkov, the older man. Renko had argued that I was a problem, and the gray-eyed man had said it didn't matter because they'd all be dead anyway. They weren't all dead. The news listed only one victim. I sat on my kitchen floor with my phone in my hand and realized something that made my skin feel too tight for my body. He had been telling me the truth, not warning me to stay silent, telling me his own fate, announcing it like it was already decided, like being alive was just something he was doing until Thursday passed and reality caught up with what he already knew. Except Thursday had passed, and I didn't know if he was dead. I shouldn't have cared. This was the exact reason I moved between cities, between jobs, between identities to avoid exactly this kind of entanglement. I didn't make connections. I didn't watch the news. I didn't care about people who sat at tables in private rooms discussing their own deaths. But I did care. And I hated that I cared. My phone buzzed at 2 a.m. on Friday night. A text from an unknown number. "You're still alive." My hands were shaking when I typed back. "Why are you texting me?" The response came immediately. "Because you're the only person in the world who knows I'm supposed to be dead." "Are you going to the police?" I stared at that message for 20 minutes before I answered. "No." Another wait. Then, good, we need to talk. Sunday. 6 p.m. The old Castellano warehouse by the pier. Come alone, or don't come at all. I deleted the conversation and threw my phone across the room. Sunday came anyway. I spent Saturday buying a new phone, new clothes, new shoes. I told myself I was doing it because my old ones had been seen at Nero's, because anyone looking for me would know what I wore. But I was also buying them because I wanted to be someone different when I saw him again. I wanted to be the kind of woman who could walk into an abandoned warehouse and talk to a man who was supposed to be dead without feeling like her ribcage was trying to crack open from the inside. The Castellano warehouse smelled like rust and salt water and rotting wood. It was the kind of place that should have been demolished years ago, all exposed beams and broken windows, and the particular kind of darkness that comes from buildings that have been abandoned so thoroughly that even the light refuses to enter. He was waiting in a shaft of moonlight that fell through a collapsed section of ceiling. He looked different. Thinner, maybe, or just more present somehow. Like he'd stepped even further into his own danger. He wore dark jeans and a black jacket, and his hands were empty, held away from his body in a way that was supposed to signal non-aggression, but only emphasized how quickly he could move if he needed to. You came, he said. I shouldn't have. No, you definitely shouldn't have. He moved, and I forced myself not to step back. Up close again, I could see the small things, a cut along his jawline, still healing, and shadows under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping. He looked at me the way he'd looked at me in the hallway at Nero's, like he was solving a puzzle that confused him. Your name isn't really Iris, he said. No, but that's what you want to be called. Yes, he nodded, accepting this the way he seemed to accept everything with a kind of tired resignation. My name is Alexei, he said. Most people call me something else, but that's my name. I want you to know my actual name, because what's about to happen requires a level of trust that assumed names don't quite reach. What's about to happen? My voice sounded small in the warehouse, swallowed by the space. My family is going to war, he said. 3 days ago, my uncle decided to consolidate power by removing threats. He decided I was a threat. He hired Renko and another man to kill me. That's what you overheard at Nero's. My uncle was telling me he'd hired them, and I was accepting that my days were numbered. But you're alive. I killed them first, Alexei said simply. Renko, the other man, and the associate they were going to use for backup. The only person my uncle actually successfully murdered was Dmitri, my uncle's own lieutenant, who was getting cold feet about betraying me. The news called it a crime of passion, mob violence. My uncle let them think that. It's useful. I was trying to process this, trying to make sense of words like killed and murdered, and the fact that he was saying them to me in an abandoned warehouse like he was ordering coffee. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you're the only person outside my immediate circle who knows I survived Thursday, he said, and because my uncle Grigor Volkov now knows that someone at Nero's heard him planning to kill me. Marco already confirmed there was a waitress named Iris working that night. You're described as forgettable, which Marco meant as a compliment to your professionalism, and which Grigor is interpreting as convenient. The word landed in my stomach like a stone. He thinks you're not a threat because you're nobody, Alexei continued. But he can't be certain. He can't afford to be certain. So he will find you, and he will kill you, just to close the loose end. Then I'll leave, I said immediately. I'll go somewhere else. New city, new name. It doesn't matter. Alexei moved closer, and this time I let him. He has resources you can't outrun. He has people in every major city. He has cops on his payroll and judges who owe him favors. You can run for the next 5 years and look over your shoulder every single day. Or what? Or you stay with me, he said, and I protect you the way only someone with my resources can, the way only someone Grigor is terrified of can. That's insane. Yes, you're asking me to move into your life because some Russian crime boss might want to kill me because I happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm asking you to survive, Alexei said, and something in his voice, some fragment of genuine emotion underneath all the danger, made me look at him more carefully. Because I'm going to owe you a debt either way. You could have told the police what you heard. You could have destroyed me with a single phone call. Instead, you're here, listening to me, letting me explain. That debt, I can use it. I can use it to build a wall between you and what's coming. But only if you're willing. The moonlight through the broken ceiling fell across his face, and I could see him clearly for the first time. Not the dangerous man at the head of the table, not the predator in the hallway, but something underneath. Something that looked like it had been broken and reassembled so many times that the original shape no longer mattered. "If I say yes," I said carefully, "what does that mean?" "It means you move into my house," he said. "It means you don't leave without security. It means you become a piece of my world, which is dark and violent, and probably going to scare you in ways you can't predict right now. And in return? In return, I promise you that no one will ever hurt you again. Not Grigor, not anyone." It was a stupid promise. The kind of promise that could never be kept. But he said it like he'd already killed everyone who would try to break it. Like the future was just a matter of eliminating problems that hadn't happened yet. "Okay," I heard myself say. Alexei closed his eyes for a moment. And when he opened them again, something had shifted in his expression, like relief. Or maybe like acceptance of something he'd been bracing for. "We leave tonight," he said. "Pack one bag. Nothing that connects to your life before this moment. Your old phone, your old clothes, your old identity, all of it stays behind. And the new identity is whatever I decide it should be," he said. "You're mine now, Iris. That's all the identity you need." The way he said it should have terrified me. But standing in that abandoned warehouse with a man who was supposed to be dead, surrounded by rust and moonlight, and the particular kind of darkness that only comes from embracing the worst parts of yourself, I realized that I'd already stopped being Iris, the forgettable waitress. I was becoming something else entirely, and he was going to teach me how to survive it. The house was a fortress. Not metaphorically, it was an actual fortress-like structure built into the side of a cliff overlooking the ocean. All black stone, and narrow windows and walls that looked thick enough to stop bullets, which, I would later learn, they could. Alexei drove the car himself, a matte black Mercedes that felt like it was designed for people trying not to be seen. We didn't speak during the drive. I watched the city disappear into suburbs. Suburbs dissolve into empty highway. An empty highway transform into the kind of landscape that belonged to people with something to hide. "The house has 17 guards," he said when we finally turned onto a private drive lined with trees that blocked the moonlight. 6 visible. 11 you won't see unless something goes wrong. There are cameras everywhere, your bedroom, the hallways, the bathrooms. Not because I want to watch you, but because I need to know who's moving through the spaces you occupy. I should have been horrified by that information. Instead, I found it strangely comforting. "Can I leave?" I asked. "Not without me, and not safely. But I don't think you're planning to." He was right. I wasn't planning to. I'd already made the decision to stay when I said yes in the warehouse. The house was colder than I expected. All marble and chrome and expensive furniture that looked like it had never been sat on. A woman in her 50s met us in the entrance. Her name was Vera, Alexei's housekeeper, and she showed me to a bedroom on the second floor without asking questions or making eye contact. "Dinner is at 8, she said in an accent that matched Alexei's. "Mr. Alexei eats in the study. You'll eat with him." Then she left me alone in a room that cost more than I'd made in a year. I didn't unpack. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to accept that my old life was actually, truly gone. No apartment in a building that smelled like other people's desperation, no job at Nero's, no carefully constructed identity as Iris, the forgettable waitress. All of it had been erased the moment I walked into that warehouse. At 7:55, I went downstairs to find the study. It was exactly what I'd expected: leather, dark wood, the kind of room that smelled like power and expensive whiskey. Alexei was behind a desk, reading something on a laptop, his face illuminated by the blue screen light. He looked younger like this, in profile, with his expression unguarded. He looked almost vulnerable, almost. "Sit," he said without looking up. I sat in the chair across from his desk. Vera appeared immediately with food, soup, bread, roasted chicken with vegetables. Real food, not the kind of thing you pick at in a restaurant kitchen. I realized I hadn't eaten since I'd gotten the text message 2 days ago. "You're scared?" Alexei said. "Yes." "Good. That means you understand what this is." "What is it?" I asked, and I meant the question to apply to both the house and the strange agreement we'd made in the warehouse. He finally looked up from his laptop, and his gray eyes found mine, with the kind of accuracy that suggested he'd been tracking me in his peripheral vision the whole time. "It's survival," he said. "For both of us. How is me being here a form of survival for you?" Alexei closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. He was still wearing the black jacket from the warehouse, and the small cut on his jawline had started to heal, leaving a thin line that made him look somehow softer than before. "Because I've spent the last decade becoming the kind of person who expects to be alone," he said. The kind of person who treats trust as a liability and intimacy as a tactical error. I've been good at it, so good that I've forgotten what it feels like to be something other than a collection of strategies. He paused, and I watched him work through whatever he was trying to say, saw the conflict play across his face like a storm moving across water. Then a waitress overheard a conversation about my death, he continued. And instead of reporting it, instead of saving herself, she quit her job and showed up at an abandoned warehouse to listen to a man talk about murder. And I realized something. That capacity for sacrifice, for choosing loyalty over logic, that's something you can't fake. That's something that only exists in people who are fundamentally good. I'm not good, I said. I've been running from my old life for years. I change names like other people change jobs. I don't form connections because I don't want to be responsible for anyone's well-being. That's not good, Alexei. That's selfish. You came to the warehouse anyway, he said simply. I didn't have an answer for that. Vera came back to clear the plates, and in her absence, Alexei stood up and walked around the desk. He was moving slowly, deliberately, giving me time to object if I wanted to. I didn't. He reached for my hand and pulled me to my feet. Come with me, he said. He led me down the hall and into a room I hadn't seen before, a library, but not the kind you'd find in a normal house. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, rolling ladders, and thousands of books organized in a system that only Alexei seemed to understand. But what caught my attention was the single photograph on the mantelpiece. A boy, maybe 12 years old, standing next to a younger woman with dark hair. The boy had gray eyes. The woman had kind eyes. My mother, Alexei said, following my gaze. She died when I was 13. She was walking home from work, she was a teacher, and she was caught in the crossfire of a gang shooting. Wrong place, wrong time. He reached for the photo, but he didn't quite touch it, like even that small contact might break something fragile. After she died, I could have become the kind of person who leaves the city and builds a normal life somewhere else, he continued. But I didn't. I stayed, and I learned how to fight, and I learned how to kill, and I learned how to control enough power that no one would ever hurt me that way again. I became a monster, Iris, but I became a monster with boundaries. I became a monster who could keep people safe. Is that supposed to make me feel better? I asked. No, he said. It's supposed to make you understand that I know what sacrifice looks like. I know what it costs, and I'm asking you to sacrifice your solitude, your ability to disappear, your protection of emotional distance, not because it benefits me, but because you're the kind of person who sees someone drowning and instinctively extends a hand, even if it means you might drown too. He turned to face me fully, and I saw something in his expression that I hadn't seen before. Not vulnerability, exactly, but a choice to be vulnerable, a deliberate lowering of the armor that usually protected him. I am going to protect you with everything I have, Alexei said. That's not negotiable. But I'm also going to try, and I'm very bad at this, so I'm warning you now. I'm going to try to be something more than a monster. I'm going to try to be the kind of man a woman like you could actually care about. Not because I deserve it, but because you deserve to have made the choice to stay mean something more than survival. I could have pulled my hand away. I could have said that this was insane, that I was in over my head, that I needed to leave before I became too entangled in the gravity of his life. But I didn't. Instead, I reached up and touched the cut on his jawline, tracing it with my fingertip, feeling the warmth of his skin and the small flinch he gave in response to being touched so carefully. Tell me something true, I said. Not about your mother, not about your protection. Something true about you, right now, in this moment. Alexei was quiet for a long time. Then he said, softly, I don't know how to not hurt people. I've tried, but it's like asking someone who's colorblind to paint a sunset. The capacity just isn't there. So, what I'm going to do instead is hurt less slowly. I'm going to be deliberate about the way I break things. Including me? Especially including you, he said. Because you're the only person who's walked into my life knowing who I am and choosing to stay anyway. And that means you're either a saint or you're as broken as I am. I'm broken, I said. I'm definitely broken. He smiled then, just slightly, and it transformed his entire face. For a moment, I could see the boy he'd been before his mother died, before he learned to kill, before he became something that lived in shadows and operated in blood. For a moment, I could see who he might have become if the world had been different. Then the moment passed, and he was Alexei again, dangerous, controlled, utterly certain of his own power. But now I understood that the vulnerability wasn't the absence of danger. It was the knowledge that danger existed, and choosing to invite me into it anyway. That was the moment I understood I was going to love him. Not because it was safe, but because it wasn't. I'd been at the house for 5 days when Grigor Volkov made his first move. It was subtle, the kind of threat that came wrapped in business terminology and family dinner invitations. A message delivered through intermediaries. The orphan boy wants to discuss terms. Come to the estate. Bring your new friend. Alexei read the message once, twice, then set it on fire with a candle from the mantelpiece. Your uncle knows I'm here, I said. He suspects. He has photos from traffic cameras on the highway, my car, your silhouette in the passenger seat. He's testing to see if I'll be stupid enough to bring you directly into his territory. Will you? Yes, he said. But not the way he expects. The estate was in the hills, accessible only by private roads and guarded gates. It was built in the style of a European manor, all cream stone and manicured gardens, and the kind of calculated elegance that comes from old money and older violence. I'd read about it online before we left Grigor Volkov's house, the crown jewel of his operation, a place that supposedly had marble imported from Italy and wine in the cellar that cost more than cars. What I hadn't expected was how much it would look like a cage. Alexei had dressed me in black, a simple dress, elegant, the kind of thing that would make me visible without making me obvious. He'd also given me a small gun, in a holster that fit against my ribs. You know how to use this? He asked while we were waiting for the car. No. Then don't. Just keep it close to your heart. If anything happens, run toward me, not away. Understood? I nodded, though understanding and believing were different things. The guards at the gate knew Alexei. They let us through without searching the car, and I realized that was the first sign of how dangerous he actually was. You didn't need to search someone who could destroy you without effort. Grigor was waiting in the drawing room. He was older than I'd expected, 60s at least, with white hair and the kind of soft body that comes from a lifetime of delegating physical work to other people. But his eyes were the same gray as Alexei's, and looking at him was like seeing Alexei's future, like watching what happens when power consumes you long enough. Alexei, Grigor said warmly, you look well. I was worried about you after Thursday, but clearly my concern was premature. You tried to have me killed, Alexei said. His voice was pleasant, conversational. Through your intermediaries, using men who were too incompetent to succeed. Then you killed Dmitri to cover the attempt, which was inefficient but understandable. I did what any patriarch would do, Grigor said. You were becoming dangerous. I am dangerous, Alexei said. I've always been dangerous. The difference is that now I'm dangerous and angry. Grigor smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes, the kind of smile that predators wear. And the girl? My responsibility. She's the liability from Nero's, yes? The one who hurt us? That was sloppy of me, admittedly. I should have swept the restaurant first. My heart was moving too fast, and I could feel the gun against my ribs like it was burning. Alexei reached over and took my hand, and his grip was tight enough that I could feel his pulse through my fingertips. Steady, controlled, absolutely certain. You can threaten her, Alexei said. But you can't touch her. Because if you do, I will burn everything you've built. I will go to the police with evidence that will destroy your entire operation. I will give them access to accounts, locations, names of judges and politicians on your payroll. I will hand them enough ammunition to investigate your activities for the next decade. And why would I give you the opportunity to do that? Grigor asked. Because I've already written it all down, Alexei said. The evidence is in a safe deposit box in a bank that's not controlled by you. If I die, if the girl is harmed, if anything happens to either of us that I don't explicitly authorize, the evidence goes directly to federal prosecutors. The only way to prevent that is to let me live and let her live. And we all go back to our respective corners of the business. It was a brilliant bluff. Or it wasn't a bluff at all, I had no way of knowing which. But Grigor was considering it with the seriousness of someone who believed it might be true. You'd really destroy your own family? Grigor asked. My family stopped existing when my mother died, Alexei said. Everything after that was just people trying to use my body and my skills. You were all replaceable. Grigor was quiet, and then he laughed, a sound that echoed through the drawing room like something breaking. You've become exactly what I feared, he said. Not just dangerous, but unpredictable. A man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous kind of man. Then we understand each other, Alexei said. And you'll leave her alone. For now, Grigor said. But alliances are fragile things, nephew. Perhaps in 6 months, perhaps in a year, circumstances will change. Perhaps she'll become less valuable to you, and then she becomes valuable to me. If you test me, Alexei said, I will kill you. Not in anger, not in self-defense. I will kill you with calculation, with patience, and with the knowledge that I will build something better than what you've built. And everyone will know it was because you couldn't resist the temptation to threaten what's mine. The way he said it, what's mine, made my stomach clench. I was a possession, a piece of property that had been claimed and would be defended with violence if necessary. It should have horrified me. It should have made me want to run. Instead, it made me feel safer than I'd ever felt in my life. Grigor studied Alexei for a long moment, and I watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. He was weighing the threats, measuring the probabilities, deciding whether his nephew was serious, or simply performing the role of a dangerous man. Very well, he said finally. The girl is off limits. But you understand the business doesn't stop, Alexei. There are still territories to control, money to move, decisions to be made. You're going to have to choose. Run with her and hide, or step into the role that was always meant to be yours. What role? Alexei asked. My successor, Grigor said. I'm getting old, Alexei. This empire needs someone young enough to take it into the future. Someone ruthless enough to make the necessary decisions. Someone like you. No, Alexei said. Think about it, Grigor said. With her at your side, you could have everything. Safety, power, legitimacy within the family. Protection that comes from being the one who holds the power, not just the one who wields it. I felt Alexei's hand tighten, and I realized that Grigor had said something that mattered. Something that Alexei wanted, even though wanting it was a kind of betrayal. We're leaving, Alexei said. He stood up, and I stood with him, following the script he'd written for us. At the door, Grigor called after us. The offer stands, nephew, and if you change your mind about her, I can arrange a replacement. Someone more suitable to a man in your position. Someone who wouldn't compromise your focus. Alexei didn't respond. He just led me out of the house and back to the car, and I didn't speak until we were away from the gates. What was he offering? I asked. The throne, Alexei said. Everything I've spent my life resisting. The thing I'm most afraid of becoming. Which is him, Alexei said. Complete and total corruption. The kind of power that turns people into something inhuman. And if you refuse, then I'll have to watch my back for the rest of my life, he said. Because Grigor doesn't accept refusal. He only accepts delay. I looked at him, and I understood then what the real threat was. Not Grigor, not the guards, not the possibility of violence. The real threat was the temptation, the possibility that everything Alexei wanted, power, legitimacy, belonging, was sitting on the other side of one choice. That I might be the thing that held him back from becoming something even more dangerous. That I might cost him everything he thought he deserved. After the estate, something shifted in the house. The guards became more visible. The security protocols became more intense, and Alexei became present in a way he hadn't been before. He stopped retreating to his study for entire days. Instead, he was in the rooms where I was, sometimes reading, sometimes just watching me move through the house like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. It was driving me insane. By the second week, I'd started cataloging his habits. The way he took his coffee, no sugar, only a small amount of cream. The way he moved through spaces, always aware of exits, always with his back to walls. The way he touched things, deliberately, with precision, like he was controlling every action through force of will, rather than allowing himself to move naturally. The house had a library, and I'd started spending most of my time there. Not because I was hiding from him, but because I needed to understand who he was when he wasn't actively trying to protect me, or fight his uncle, or make calculated decisions about my safety. I was reading about Russian history when he found me. It was late, past midnight, and the house was that kind of quiet that only happens when people are pretending to sleep while remaining completely alert. Alexei came in without knocking, carrying a bottle of wine that looked old enough to have cost more than my previous apartment. You're still awake, he said. So are you. He settled into the chair across from mine and poured wine into 2 glasses with the kind of practiced ease that suggested he'd spent a lot of time drinking alone. Grigor will make his move within the month, Alexei said. I've been monitoring communications between him and the other families. They're meeting, building consensus, testing the idea of removing me entirely. Can he do that? Yes, Alexei said. But it would take time, and it would require the cooperation of people who aren't entirely sure they can trust each other. Which is why I'm going to move first. How? By doing the thing he said I should do, Alexei said. By stepping into the role he was offering. By becoming his successor. I set my book down, feeling something in my chest tighten. You said no. I lied, he said. I said no because I was angry, and because you were there, and I wanted you to think I was something other than what I am. But the truth is, the throne is the only thing that will protect you, not from Grigor directly, but from everyone else who comes after him. Once I'm in control, once I've consolidated enough power that people actually believe I'll use it, then you become untouchable. At what cost? Everything, Alexei said simply. I'll have to do things you don't want to know about. I'll have to make decisions that will keep me awake at night. I'll have to become something worse than what I am now, because that's what this world demands. And if I ask you not to? He looked at me over the rim of his wineglass, and for a moment I saw the exhaustion again, the place inside him where the boy who loved his mother was still trying to survive. Then I would probably do it anyway, he said. Because protecting you has become more important to me than being able to look at myself in the mirror. That's what you've done to me, Iris. You've made me capable of monstrosity in the name of love. That's not love, I said. That's obsession. Perhaps, he said. But it's all I have to offer. He stood up and came to my chair, and this time when he reached for me, I didn't move away. He pulled me to my feet, and his hands, those careful, controlled hands, moved to my face with surprising gentleness. I'm going to kiss you now, he said. And I'm going to do it in a way that acknowledges that I know I'm taking something from you that you didn't consent to give. And then you're going to tell me to stop. And I'm going to stop. Because the one thing I won't do is hurt you. He kissed me softly, carefully, like I was made of something breakable. His lips were warm, and he tasted like wine and smoke and the specific kind of danger that had stopped frightening me weeks ago. When I didn't tell him to stop, he deepened the kiss, pulling me closer, and I realized that this was what intimacy meant to someone like him. Not passion, not loss of control, but the most careful calculation of exactly how much of himself he could give without destroying what he was trying to protect. I pulled back first, not because I wanted to stop, but because I needed him to understand something. If you do this, I said, if you take the throne and become Grigor, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that you won't use me as an excuse, I said. Promise me that the horrible things you do because they're necessary, not because they protect me, because I don't want to spend the rest of my life knowing that I'm the reason you've become something you hate. Alexei closed his eyes, and I watched his jaw clench as he processed what I'd asked. I can't make that promise, he said finally. Because the truth is, I'm already using you as an excuse. I'm using you to justify decisions I wanted to make anyway. I'm using you to give myself permission to become Grigor. Then why are you telling me? Because I think you deserve to know the truth, he said. I think you deserve to make your decision based on who I actually am, not who I'm pretending to be. He pulled me back, and this time the kiss was different. It was urgent and raw, and it tasted like resignation, like he was accepting that loving me meant accepting that he would use me, and that I would accept being used, and that we would both wake up every day knowing that the other was a form of corruption. It was the most honest thing that had ever happened to me. The coup was bloodless, and that was how I knew it was real. Alexei didn't kill Grigor. He didn't need to. He simply moved into the spaces of power with the kind of inevitability that comes from being the exact person everyone had been expecting all along. Within 3 weeks, the families had acknowledged his authority. Within 2 months, Grigor was dead of a heart attack. Official cause of death, sudden cardiac arrest, nothing suspicious at all. I watched the transition happen from inside the house, which had somehow transformed from a fortress into a base of operations. There were meetings now, men coming and going at all hours, money being counted in the study. Alexei moved through it all with the kind of cold precision that made me understand that he hadn't been lying when he said he'd become Grigor. He'd become worse. I'd expected the distance. I'd expected that the cost of his transformation would include some withdrawal from me, some emotional retraction as he adapted to the weight of the empire. What I hadn't expected was the deliberation of it. It was exactly 2 months after Grigor's death when Alexei came to my room in the middle of the night. Tomorrow, he said, I'm going to execute 2 of my uncle's old advisors. They've been skimming money from operations in the Northeast, and they need to be removed. I wanted you to know that before you hear about it from someone else. I sat up, and even in the darkness, I could see that he looked hollowed out. Are they guilty? I asked. Yes. Completely, unambiguously guilty. Then you need to do it. I know, he said. But I'm telling you first because I need you to understand what I'm becoming. I need you to see me in this role and decide whether you can still care about me. Can you stop being this? I asked. If you wanted to? No, he said. This is who I am underneath everything else. This is the person who exists without the filters you helped me maintain. He sat on the edge of my bed, and I could feel the weight of him there, physical and real and exhausted in a way that went beyond sleep deprivation. I've been thinking about my mother, he said, trying to remember who I was before she died. There's this memory I keep returning to. I was maybe 8 years old, and she was trying to teach me to read in English. We were sitting in the kitchen, and I wasn't paying attention, and she got frustrated and threw a book across the room. Just threw it, let her anger out for 1 second, and then immediately burst into tears because she couldn't believe she'd done it. He paused, and I listened to the silence of the house around us. I think about that memory, he continued, and I think about how much time she spent trying to be something she wasn't, trying to be patient, trying to be gentle, trying to suppress the parts of her that wanted to break things, and I wonder if that's what killed her. If the act of containing herself took so much energy that she didn't hear the gunshots coming. You can't think like that, I said. You can't blame your mother for her own death. No, he agreed. But I can refuse to spend my life pretending to be something different from what I am. I can accept that I'm the kind of person who, given power, will exercise it without hesitation. I can stop apologizing for that, and just become it fully. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark grounds of the estate. In the moonlight, I could see his reflection in the glass, and he looked like a ghost of himself. I'm going to ask you something, he said, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay. Do you hate me? The question hung in the air between us, and I realized that this was what the distance had been about. He'd been creating space for me to leave. He'd been showing me exactly who he was, the monster, the tyrant, the man capable of executing people without ceremony, and he'd been waiting for me to decide that I couldn't do it. No, I said. I don't hate you, but I'm terrified of you. He turned from the window, and his expression shifted slightly, not quite relief, but something close. Good, he said. If you weren't terrified, I wouldn't believe you understood what you were choosing. I got out of bed and crossed the room to him, and when I took his face in my hands, I felt him flinch slightly, like he wasn't used to being touched with anything other than intention. I kissed him slowly, deliberately, giving him time to refuse if he wanted to. He didn't refuse. He pulled me closer, and his hands moved up my back with a kind of urgency that suggested he was trying to memorize exactly what it felt like to be held by someone who wasn't running away. I'm terrified, I said against his mouth, but I'm staying. Because I'm broken the same way you're broken, I said, because I've spent my entire life becoming invisible, and you've spent yours becoming impossible to ignore. And somehow, we fit. He picked me up and carried me to the bed, and what happened next was different from what had happened in the library. It was rough and urgent and desperate in a way that suggested he was trying to anchor himself to something real. His hands were careful, but his movements were not. He moved like someone claiming territory, marking boundaries, reminding me that I belonged to him, and I let him, because the truth was that I did belong to him. Somewhere in the last 3 months, I'd stopped being Iris, the waitress who moved between cities. I'd become Iris, the woman who belonged to the man who was going to execute his enemies without hesitation, and then come to my room and kiss me like it would save him. When it was over, we lay in the darkness, and his heartbeat was fast beneath my ear. Tell me something true, I said, repeating his earlier request. I'm terrified of losing you, he said. Not because you're valuable, though you are, but because you're the only thing in my life that isn't a calculation. You're the only place where I don't have to think about moves and counter-moves. With you, I can just exist. That won't last, I said. Once you've been in power long enough, you'll start seeing me as part of the game. You'll start strategizing about how to use me. Probably, he said. But not yet. Please, not yet. And I understood then what he was really asking for. Not forever, he was too smart to believe in forever. Just time. Just this one period of his life where he could be human with me before the demands of his empire made him into something else entirely. Not yet, I promised. The betrayal came from inside. Vera, the housekeeper who'd been with the family for 20 years, had been feeding information to one of the rival families. Small things at first, movement patterns, security protocols, the schedule of the guards. But it had been escalating, and when Alexei discovered it, he discovered it completely. She was still in the house when he brought me into the study. She was sitting in a chair, restrained by 2 guards, and her face had the kind of resignation that came from accepting your own death before it arrived. Alexei stood in front of her, and his expression was perfectly, entirely blank. $67,000, he said to me. That's what they offered her, for everything she knew about this house, about my operations, about you. Alexei, I started. She brought you tea every morning, he continued. She helped you settle into your room. She was the closest thing you had to a friend in this house, and she was calculating exactly which information would fetch the highest price. Vera spoke then, her voice thick with an accent that had been less pronounced when she was pretending to be loyal. You paid me nothing, she said. Nothing but a room and food. I have family in Ukraine. My daughter is sick. They offered enough for treatment. I looked at Alexei, and I saw the moment his face shifted. He understood the motivation. He understood completely, and that was what was dangerous. Understanding made the execution personal rather than business. Leave, he said to the guards. Sir, one of them started. Leave. They left. Vera watched them go, and then she looked at me, and I saw something like apology in her expression. I didn't tell them about you, she said. When they asked who you were, I told them you were nothing. That you would leave soon, that you meant nothing to him. I tried to protect you. That was kind, I said, and I meant it. Alexei turned to look at me, and something in his expression shifted. You can't do that. What? I asked. You can't humanize her, he said. You can't make this complicated. It's already complicated, I said. She betrayed you, but her daughter is sick. Both things are true. If I show mercy, Alexei said quietly, if I choose the complicated path, then everyone else in my organization will believe they can too. They'll believe they can commit betrayal as long as the motivation is sympathetic enough. That leads to weakness, and weakness leads to war. And if you don't show mercy? I asked. If you execute her for trying to save her daughter's life, then everyone knows the cost of disloyalty, and they think twice before accepting money from my enemies. He was right. I hated that he was right, but he was. In this world that we'd entered, mercy was a luxury that could destroy everything he'd built. I can't watch, I said. I know, Alexei said. That's okay. I left the study, but I didn't go far. I went to the hallway and pressed my back against the wall, and I waited for the sound of gunfire that would never come in the study of a house with soundproofing this good. What I heard instead was worse. I heard Alexei's voice, very quiet, having a conversation with Vera about her daughter, about the treatment she needed, about the cost, about whether Ukraine was safe enough for the money to reach her family. And then I heard the sound of something wet and final, the kind of sound that your body understands before your mind does. Alexei came out of the study a few minutes later, and he was wiping his hands on a cloth that had been white when he started. It's done, he said. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I offered her a choice, he continued, like he needed me to understand that he'd been merciful in some small way. She could live, leave the country, and I would ensure her daughter received treatment as long as she never spoke about what happened in this house. Or she could stay, knowing that her death was the price of her betrayal. What did she choose? She chose to stay, he said. She said that if she left, Grigor's enemies would find her eventually, and they would use her daughter as leverage. She said that this way, at least her daughter got the treatment and wasn't condemned for her mother's choices. He sounded like he was reciting facts, like he was trying to make sense of a calculation he'd already run 1,000 times. She was brave, I said finally. Yes, Alexei said. That's what makes it worse. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw the cracks appearing, not in the armor he wore for the public, but in the person he was when I was alone with him. I saw the moment when killing someone good had cost him something. I made a mistake, he said. I let you change me enough that I could still feel the weight of my decisions. That was stupid. It made me weak. Or it made you human, I said. There's no room for human in this, he said. Human is the thing that gets you killed. He walked past me, toward the stairs, and I followed him because I didn't know what else to do. We ended up in the library, and he poured vodka with a level of precision that suggested he was trying to control every aspect of his environment. I think I need to let you go, he said. The words landed in my stomach like a physical blow. No, I said. Yes, he said. You came into my life as a liability, and I chose to keep you because it made me feel less alone. But that was selfish. It was asking you to live in this world, to be complicit in this world, just so I didn't have to experience its complete isolation. If you're trying to protect me, I'm trying to be honest with you, he said. I'm trying to acknowledge that staying with me will cost you your soul, and that's not a price I want to be responsible for charging. I moved toward him, and he put up a hand to stop me. Don't, he said. Don't touch me right now, because if you touch me, I might change my mind. And if I change my mind, I'll convince myself that having you here is worth whatever it costs you. And I can't do that anymore. You don't get to decide that for me, I said. You don't get to make this choice and wrap it up in concern for my well-being. That's cowardice. Something flickered across his face. Anger, maybe, or recognition. You're right, he said. You're right. I'm being a coward. I'm being weak. But the truth is, I killed someone today who reminded me of my mother, who made a bad choice for a good reason, and the goodness of her reason didn't save her. And I realize that if I stay with you, if I continue to let you humanize me, someday I'm going to have to choose between protecting you and being the person I need to be. And I don't trust myself to choose you. Then give me the choice, I said. Don't make it for me. Alexei looked at me across the library, and I saw the war happening behind his eyes. The part of him that wanted to be something better, fighting against the part of him that knew exactly what he was. Stay or leave, I continued. But don't hide behind concern for me as an excuse to push me away, because you're afraid that loving me makes you weak. He drank the vodka in one swallow, and when he looked at me again, something had shifted in his expression. If you stay, he said, you become complicit. You're not just witnessing the darkness, you're choosing to let it touch you. Are you sure? No, I said. But I'm staying anyway. The attack came 3 weeks later. It wasn't Grigor's enemies, they'd mostly died in the transition of power. It was a rival family from the south, a group that had decided that with Alexei still consolidating control, now was the time to make a move. They came at night, and they came prepared. I was asleep when Alexei pulled me out of bed. For a moment, I thought it was another one of his dreams. He had them sometimes, violent things that woke him in a cold sweat. But then I heard the gunfire, muffled but unmistakable, and I understood. Downstairs, he said. The safe room. What's happening? They're testing my defenses. Get to the safe room. The house was chaos, guards moving, alarms sounding, the particular kind of panic that comes from invasion. Alexei was still in his underwear, pulling on a shirt, and his movements were economical and fast. He grabbed a gun from the nightstand drawer and handed it to me. Point at anyone who isn't me, he said. Pull the trigger if you need to. Don't hesitate, Alexei. But he was already moving toward the door. I followed him down the hallway, and the sounds of violence were getting louder. I could hear gunfire, could hear men shouting in Russian, could smell the acrid smoke of fired bullets. The safe room was hidden behind a bookcase in the study. Alexei punched in a code, and the door slid open. Lock yourself in, he said. Don't come out unless you hear my voice directly. If anyone else tells you it's safe, don't believe them. Don't leave me, I said. I have to, he said. I have to show them that I can defend what's mine. He kissed me rough, urgent, like it might be the last time. And then he was gone, pulling the bookcase closed behind him, and I was alone in a small room with concrete walls and a gun I'd never used and a sound system that broadcast every scream from the house above. I sat in the darkness and listened to Alexei defend his empire. For the first hour, the fighting was intense. I could hear the violence through the speakers, gunfire, shouting, the sound of things breaking. And then, gradually, it changed. The gunfire became less frequent, and the shouting became less organized. By the third hour, there was only silence. It stretched out, that silence, and it felt like it lasted for days. Then I heard Alexei's voice, low and deliberately calm. Iris. It's safe. Come out. I opened the safe room and climbed back into the wreckage of the house. The study was covered in blood, so much blood that I couldn't immediately understand where all of it was coming from. 3 men were dead on the floor, and there was a 4th body in the hallway. Alexei was standing in the kitchen, running water over his hands, and the water turning red as the blood washed away. How many? I asked. 7 of mine, he said. 12 of theirs. They got farther than I expected, but not far enough. He looked up at me, and his expression was something I'd never seen before. Not angry, not cold, but something that looked almost like grief. I had to do it myself, he said. 3 of them. I had to kill with my hands because the guards were overwhelmed. I'm covered in their blood, Iris. It's under my fingernails. It's in my mouth. Can you smell it? I could, but that wasn't the point. Come upstairs, I said. We'll wash it off. He looked like he was going to argue, but then he followed me up to the master bathroom. I ran a shower and helped him out of his underwear, and I climbed in with him fully clothed, because I couldn't bear the idea of him being alone in there. The water turned red, then pink, then clear, and his hands shook as he tried to scrub away evidence of the violence. I washed his back, his arms, his hair, and I thought about what Vera had said, that she'd tried to protect me by telling them I was nothing. I thought about how that protection had cost her life, and I thought about how Alexei had just killed 12 men to protect something, even though he still didn't believe it was worth the cost. When we got out of the shower, he was shivering, and I wrapped him in a towel and led him to bed. He lay down facing the wall, and I curled up behind him, my arms around his waist. I'm losing myself, he said quietly. I can feel it happening. Every person I kill, every decision I make that's motivated by cruelty instead of strategy, it's taking another piece of who I was. I know, I said. I'm sorry, he said. I'm sorry that I'm using you as the anchor that keeps me tethered to some version of humanity. It's not fair. Then stop, I said. Stop using me as an anchor. Let yourself become whatever you're becoming. I'll follow anyway. Why? He asked. Because I love you, I said. And love means staying even when the person you love is becoming something you don't recognize. Especially then. He turned to face me, and his eyes were wet, which I'd never seen before. Alexei didn't cry. Alexei was too controlled, too aware of every emotion, and how it might be used against him. I don't deserve you, he said. No, I agreed. But you're going to keep me anyway, because losing me would be worse than keeping me. And that's not love, it's just another calculation. But I've accepted that you're incapable of love without calculation. So we're just going to have to make peace with that. I kissed him, tasting salt, and the remnants of violence, and the particular kind of devotion that only comes from staying when you've seen exactly what someone is capable of. And he kissed me back, desperately, like I was the only real thing in a world that was becoming increasingly abstract. 6 months after the attack, Alexei asked me to marry him. We were in the library, our place, the place where we'd first kissed, and where we went when we needed to be away from the empire he was building. The ring he presented was simple, a black diamond set in platinum, and it was the most honest thing he'd ever given me because it was the most impractical. A man like Alexei shouldn't have been capable of giving something impractical. I want you to have every reason to stay, he said, legally, financially, emotionally. I want to tie you to me so completely that leaving would cost you everything. That's romantic, I said dryly. It's honest, he said. It's what I do. I take things and I secure them. I make them mine, and you've been the only thing in my life that I want to do that with. Not because you're valuable, but because you're the only thing I want to possess consciously, deliberately, knowing exactly what I'm doing. I put on the ring, and it felt heavy, like a promise or a threat, I wasn't entirely sure which. We were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the estate. Grigor's old friends attended, now Alexei's allies. There were judges and politicians, and people whose careers depended on Alexei's continued goodwill. But it didn't feel like a wedding. It felt like a business transaction dressed up in white flowers and vodka. What it felt like afterward, alone in the master bedroom that had become mine as much as his, that felt like something closer to real. Tell me something true, I said, as he unbuttoned my dress. I'm terrified that you'll leave me, he said immediately. That one day you'll wake up and realize that the person you love isn't in here anymore. That I've become so much like Grigor that you can't tell the difference. That when you look at me, you see my uncle instead. Do you see the difference? I asked. He was quiet, considering the question with the kind of seriousness that meant he was actually thinking about it, not just giving me what I wanted to hear. No, he said finally. I don't think I do anymore. I pulled the dress over my head and stood in front of him, completely vulnerable, and I took his hand and placed it on my heart. Then we're both lost, I said. But at least we're lost together. What happened next was different from every other time we'd been together. It wasn't rough or desperate or urgent. It was slow and deliberate, and it felt like him understanding that he was allowed to want something without calculating its strategic value. He touched me like I was something precious, something that might break if he wasn't careful, and I understood that this was the closest he'd ever come to being gentle without it feeling like a lie. Later, after it was over, he lay with his head on my chest, and I ran my fingers through his hair, and he talked. My mother used to sing, he said. Ukrainian songs, lullabies, things that probably made no sense translated into English. But she had this specific song that she would sing when she was tired, and I've been trying to remember the words for 20 years. Do you remember the melody? I asked. No, he said. I just remember that it made her sound sad and happy at the same time. I held him, and I didn't tell him that I loved him, because we'd moved past love into something that didn't have a name. It was too practical to be love, too invested in the future to be just desire. It was what happened when two broken people decided to stop fighting the fact that they'd broken each other, and started instead to build something new from the pieces. I'm going to need you to do something, he said. Something that will require you to compromise your moral standards in a way you won't be able to walk back from. Okay, I said. I haven't even asked yet. I know. But the answer is yes, because I know that you wouldn't ask if it wasn't necessary, and I've accepted that I'm going to be complicit in whatever you're building. So yes, whatever it is. He propped himself up on his elbow and looked down at me, and I saw the moment he made a decision. There's a man who works for one of the rival families, he said. He's been gathering evidence about my operations, trying to build a case that the federal government might be interested in. I need you to seduce him. It wasn't a shock, exactly. I'd known that my usefulness to Alexei extended beyond companionship, but hearing it stated so plainly was different from suspecting it. And then? I asked. And then we eliminate him. But while he's vulnerable, while he's focused on you, we get the evidence he's gathered. We also install surveillance in his apartment, monitor his communications, to map out his entire operation. And if I refuse, then I'll find someone else, he said. But I want it to be you, because you're the only person I trust to come back to me after spending time in someone else's bed. That's not trust, I said. That's possession. Yes, he said. But you've made it clear you prefer honesty to flattery. He was right. I did prefer honesty. And the honest truth was that I'd already agreed to this when I married him, when I accepted the ring, when I stayed in the house knowing exactly what kind of man he was. When? I asked. Next month, he said. When the Westfield conference happens, he'll be there, and he'll be vulnerable. And after it's done, Alexei said, you become my wife in more than just legal status. You become the person who holds half my power, and everyone in this organization will know it. I understood what he was offering, not forgiveness for her complicity, but elevation. He was making me a partner instead of a possession. He was saying that if I was willing to become the kind of person who could do this, I deserved to be treated as an equal. Okay, I said. Tell me what you need me to know. The Westfield conference was held in a hotel ballroom decorated with expensive flowers that smelled like funeral arrangements. The man was named David Chen, and he was exactly what Alexei's intelligence suggested, mid-30s. Successful in his own right, but underneath it all, terrified. He ordered champagne with slightly shaking hands when I approached him at the bar, and when I introduced myself, his eyes lit up like I was the first genuine thing to happen to him in months. It was almost easy. Almost. I spent 3 days with David Chen, and I learned things about him that made the assignment harder than Alexei had promised. He'd become a federal informant because he was afraid that his employer was going to kill him anyway, and he was trying to save his sister, who was being held in a facility for medical issues that required expensive treatment. He was trying to do the right thing in a situation where every choice was wrong. He reminded me of Vera. On the third night, David told me that he loved me. He said it quietly, in a hotel room that smelled like expensive perfume and desperation, and I felt something crack in my chest. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. For what? He asked. You'll understand soon, I said. I'm sorry. The federal agents came for him the next morning, but they didn't come because Alexei had turned him over to them. They came because Alexei had orchestrated a situation where the rival family thought David was about to flip. They killed him before he could actually become useful to the government, and Alexei's agents cleaned up the scene and recovered the evidence that had been so valuable. It was brilliant and horrible, and exactly the kind of thing I'd agreed to when I married him. I didn't go home immediately. I went to a hotel across the city and sat on a bed that wasn't mine and cried for a man I'd manipulated into believing that I cared about him. When Alexei finally found me, and of course he found me, he had people everywhere. He didn't apologize. He just sat next to me and held me until the shaking stopped. "You did well," he said. "He thought I loved him," I said. "And you didn't?" "No," I said. "But I liked him. And I'm not sure which is worse." "Liking him was the vulnerability that made the manipulation work," Alexei said. "If you'd hated him, it would have been obvious. The fact that you genuinely cared about him made everything you did more effective." "Don't," I said. "Don't try to make this okay by explaining it to me. It's not okay. We're not okay." "I know," he said. "But we're still going to be fine." And that was the moment I understood that this was all I was ever going to get from him, not redemption. Not the idea that our love could wash away the violence, but simple, stubborn acceptance that we'd both chosen this, and neither of us was going to escape it. We drove back to the house in silence, and when we got there, Alexei led me to his study. He had a video on his laptop, and when he pressed play, I saw the rival family's operation being dismantled. Federal agents, coordinated with Alexei's intelligence, were taking them apart from the inside. The man who'd hired David Chen to spy on Alexei was being led away in handcuffs. "I sent the evidence we gathered from David's apartment to my contacts in federal law enforcement," Alexei said. "The rival family is going to spend the next 5 years in prison, and their operation is going to implode." David died as part of that process, but he also accomplished what he was trying to do. He took down the people who were threatening to kill him. "He died because we used him," I said. "Yes," Alexei said. "But he also died knowing that he'd hurt the people who were threatening his sister's life, and his sister is going to receive treatment now, paid for by the government as part of a witness protection settlement." "You're justifying murder." "No," he said. "I'm acknowledging that the outcome was partly what he would have wanted, even though the path to that outcome was built on your deception and his death. I wanted to hate him for that reasoning. But the horrible truth was that he was right. David Chen would have wanted his sister to have treatment, and now she would. And he would never know that the woman he loved was the reason he died, just like he would never know that his death actually accomplished something." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you take the position you've earned," Alexei said. "You become the person who sits in on meetings. You become the woman who everyone knows could destroy their careers with a single conversation with me. You become the first wife of the organization. And if I don't want that, then I release you," he said simply. "I let you go. I give you money, a new identity, a life somewhere far away from this, and I never contact you again." It was a lie, and we both knew it. But it was a kind lie, the kind that acknowledged that I had the freedom to choose even though my choice had already been made the moment I married him. "There's something I need to tell you," I said. "Something true." "Okay. I don't love you anymore," I said. "The woman who loved you died in that hotel room with David Chen. What I feel for you now is something else. It's investment and partnership, and the specific kind of intimacy that comes from knowing someone's worst parts and choosing to stay. But it's not love." Alexei was quiet, and then he smiled a real smile, not the predatory thing he usually did, but something that looked almost sad. "I know," he said. "Love is a luxury for people who aren't building empires. We have something better than love. We have understanding." He pulled me close, and I rested my head on his chest, and I listened to his heartbeat steady, controlled, absolutely certain of its own power. Outside the study, the house hummed with the presence of the organization he'd built. Inside, we sat together in the particular kind of silence that only comes from two people who've destroyed each other and decided to stay anyway. 3 months later, the first of the remaining rival families asked to meet with Alexei under a truce flag. They sent a message requesting a meeting, and I was there when they arrived. I sat beside Alexei at the negotiating table, and I watched men's faces change as they understood that I wasn't a decoration or a weakness, but an actual participant in the power structure. "My wife has final approval on all distribution territory negotiations," Alexei said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And that was when I understood that he'd kept his promise. He'd made me untouchable, not by protecting me from the violence, but by making me essential to it. In the months that followed, I learned to speak the language of the organization. I learned how to read the subtext of threats, how to navigate the delicate balance of respect and terror that kept everyone in line. I learned that power was a thing you maintained not through strength but through the constant, deliberate display of consequences. And somewhere in that learning, the woman I'd been before the warehouse at the pier disappeared entirely. I became what Alexei had promised, a partner in his empire, a woman who could destroy careers with a conversation, a wife who understood exactly what it meant to love someone by building something terrible with them. 6 months after my first assignment, sitting in the library with a glass of wine and a book I wasn't reading, I realized that I couldn't remember what Iris the waitress wanted. I couldn't remember her dreams or her fears or the person she'd been before she overheard 2 men planning a death in a restaurant that smelled like garlic and burnt oil. Alexei found me there, like he always did, and he kissed the top of my head. "You're thinking about the past," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm thinking about the woman I was," I said. "The one who tried so hard to be invisible. She's not gone," he said. "She's just dormant. When we're alone, sometimes I see her. She's still in you. But she's not in control anymore." "No," he said. "You are. And you're so much more formidable." He was right. But formidable wasn't the same as happy, and I'd long ago made peace with the fact that happiness was a luxury for people who weren't building empires with blood and negotiation, and the specific kind of cruelty that comes from seeing someone as a problem to be solved, rather than a person to be understood. The final scene plays out on a night that looks like every other night in the house: expensive wine, the hum of the organization around us, the knowledge that there are people planning violence in rooms we can't see. Alexei and I sit in the library, and he tells me about the next challenge coming from the West Coast. A family that's growing too ambitious, pushing into territories that should be ours, the violence that's coming. And I listen, and I calculate, and I offer strategies, and I become the thing he made me, not the waitress who overheard assassins planning his death, but the wife who helps orchestrate other deaths, who sits at negotiating tables, who understands that power is built on carefully managed consequences and the willingness to follow through on threats. This is the ending, not happy, not tragic, but something far more honest than either. 2 broken people, building an empire on the foundation of their own destructibility, and finding in that process a form of love that has no name because it transcends everything love is supposed to be. In the darkness of the library, with the weight of his arm around me, and the knowledge that tomorrow will bring new challenges and new opportunities for violence, I understand that I've finally become invisible in the way I always wanted to be. Invisible to everyone but him, and that is enough.